financial markets in turmoil.
What are the root causes of the financial crisis?
The dollar losing value.
Heading for its biggest loss in nearly 3 decades.
Will Social Security even be there?
I don't know.
Buy or rent?
That's a very good question.
Interest rates.
I'm not so sure.
Where do you put your money?
I don't know.
Welcome to the show that answers your questions. This is Follow the Money Weekly with your host, economist and best-selling author. Here's Jerry Robinson.
Well, friends, welcome to you all around the world. Welcome to Follow the Money Radio. So grateful to have you here along for the ride. As you heard, my name is Jerry Robinson. I'm an economist, an investor, a trader, and a coach here at followthemoney.com. We have many members. We love help them understand how to invest, how to trade, how to make sense of money, how to not let money rule over them. Boy, money sure is a wonderful servant, but it is a terrible master. Well, today we have a really interesting show. Today we're going to be talking about why China is winning. Why China is winning. You know, the world seems to be a little bit surprised by the fact that China is doing so well economically in the wake of the pandemic. And it's not a surprise here at Follow the Money. In fact, for those of you who were at our 2019 Follow the Money Summit, the entire summit was themed around China, because we had stated and were promoting at this particular summit last year, or I guess now 2 years ago in 2019, that China was going to dominate the 21st century, economically speaking, and also, which, you know, not just economically, but in many ways politically, because with economic power, of course, you also gain political power. And there has been, I think, an awareness of the rise of China more recently because of much of what former President Trump had said about China, kind of pointing the finger at China. It was this week, however, that a stunning report was put out by the Wall Street Journal that caused some economists to really kind of reassess what's going on. And let me just quote this real quickly to you. The Wall Street Journal had an article on the 24th of January entitled "China Overtakes U.S. as World's Leading Destination for Foreign Direct Investment." I'll read you just a few sentences here of the report. It says, China overtook the U.S. as the world's top destination for new foreign direct investment last year, it's 2020, as the COVID-19 pandemic amplifies an eastward shift in the center of gravity of the global economy. New investments by overseas businesses into the U.S., which for decades held the number one spot, fell 49% in 2020, according to figures released on Sunday, as the country struggled to curb the spread of the new coronavirus and economic output slumped. China, long ranked number 2, saw direct investments by foreign companies climb 4%. Beijing used strict lockdowns to largely contain COVID-19 after the disease first emerged in a central Chinese city, and China's gross domestic product grew even as most other major economies contracted last year. So, clearly here, this is a stunning development that many people did not expect to actually happen this quickly. The fact that China would overtake the U.S. as the world's leading destination for FDI, or foreign direct investment. That's huge. And this is just one metric that we have seen recently showing that China is winning. If this is an economic race, which apparently the United States thinks that it is, and of course China does as well, then China is winning. 2020 was a really great year for China. In fact, Chinese stocks outpaced the United States. The Chinese stock market outperformed the U.S. stock market in 2020, despite all of the incredible money supply that was created out of thin air by the Federal Reserve, despite all of the monetary policy and even the fiscal policy that was promoted here in the United States, and interest rates at zero practically. Still, China's stock market, with a 4% interest rate, by the way, in China, outperformed the U.S. stock market in 2020. So too, China enjoyed a record trade surplus in 2020. It had never seen so many exports. Its exports reached an all-time high of $2.6 trillion in 2020. And that was despite that bitter trade war with President Donald Trump. And so, again, record surplus here for China. Also, China enjoyed the largest increase in its share of global GDP since the 1970s last year. So it was a real nice bump economically for China in many of the rankings. And most people know now that China was the only major economy to enjoy economic growth in 2020. So all of that data is, of course, stunning. But whenever you also consider some of the things that happened even earlier in the year, for example, consider the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that was signed back in November that created the largest trading bloc in the world, and China, of course, among those nations. And also not among those nations is the United States, right? So this was the world's largest trading bloc was put into force and created in November, and this is the biggest free trade deal in the world, and the United States was not included. So too, we saw China surpass the U.S. to become the EU's largest trading partner. That was a big shakeup. Over the first 9 months of 2020, at least the data that I have here from Eurostat, shows that China's economy actually moved into a place of being the largest trading partner with the EU. And that's also very, very telling. Now, we have already been saying here for many years that China is the largest economy on a GDP PPP basis. That is purchasing power parity. That is all things being equal. If you take out the exchange rates, if you take out everything and you just say, well, how much does a dollar buy here and how much does a dollar buy there? Well, you'll discover that China is the largest economy based upon that particular metric. And that metric is much more telling and much more accurate, I would say, than nominal GDP, which is what we normally look at and which is how we justify being larger than China right now. The United States would justify being larger than China, economically speaking, because of that nominal GDP figure. So when we take a look at China, we just see simply a rapidly growing country. Every single year, China is adding the equivalent of the entire Australian economy to its GDP, right? Think about that. China is a manufacturing powerhouse. Manufacturing composes upwards of 40% of China's annual GDP numbers. That's enormous. That's enormous, especially when you consider that here in the United States, consumption composes 70% of our GDP. So when you look at things that are made in China, you'll find that 90% of the world's computers are made in China. 80% of the world's air conditioners are made in China. 75% of the world's solar panels made in China. 70% of the world's cell phones and 60% of the world's shoes are made in China. China's economic rise has certainly caught the imagination and the attention of many economists around the world. And we don't have time to go into the 1911 revolution in China or the 1949 revolution. But here today where we stand, many years, I guess 70 years or 72 years since that 1949 revolution that created the People's Republic of China, a fully communist government. Now we have a government with the current leader, Xi Jinping, who now enjoys lifetime access to that top seat of power there in China. And China's economy has exploded over the last 5 or 6 decades in what modern economists have dubbed an economic miracle. Never before in world history has any nation lifted more people out of poverty than China has over the last 50 years. It's a fact. China's economy grew an average of 10.5% annually from 1980 to 2016. During that time, GDP per capita rose from $300 to more than $6,000. That's an astonishing increase that has known no historical equal. Nearly 1 billion Chinese have risen from poverty over the last several decades. The size of China's economy multiplied 42 times between 1980 and 2017. Now, many Americans get tripped up when it comes to this concept that China is the best case of leading economic development in human history. Up until just recently, most experts believed that a nation's economic growth was largely dependent upon its style of government. Specifically, the experts told us that democracy was a key ingredient in creating successful and sustainable economic growth. And the experts refer to this as modernization theory, which predicts that the wealthier a nation becomes, the more democratic its government becomes. But as we have seen, a simple case study of China exposes this line of thinking now as a myth. I recently heard a billionaire investor by the name of Charlie Munger. And if you don't know who Charlie Munger is, Mr. Munger is the co-founder of Berkshire Hathaway. He and another very famous investor you probably know, Warren Buffett, served together and run Berkshire Hathaway. Mr. Munger is one of the richest investors who has ever lived. He is one of the most successful investors who has ever lived. And I heard him recently speaking on another radio interview, and I wanted to share a little clip of it with you. I found it very fascinating. Let's roll the tape here of Charlie Munger, again, a U.S. billionaire investor, explaining the rise of China to a U.S. audience. Roll the tape.
The other thing that's really remarkable, the last 30 years of China, they have had real economic growth at a rate for 30 years that no big country has ever had before in the history of the world. And who did that? A bunch of communist Chinese. Now that is really remarkable. So if you're studying finance, you got a lot of strange things to account for.
Let's pause right there just for a moment. I want to remind you, for those of you who are not familiar with Mr. Munger is 97 years old, and he has been around for quite some time. What he is saying here is relatively novel for many people who are not following the China story. But let him continue, because he's going to add to what he has said. Roll the tape.
And of course, I've had very successful experience there, and I think it's likely to continue. The Chinese story is the damnedest thing that it's the damnedest thing that ever happened to a big country in terms of economics. No other big country ever got ahead this fast for that long.
And does that say that sort of the politics don't matter so much, or?
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation. What that shows is exactly right. Who would have guessed that a bunch of communist Chinese run by one party would have the best economic record that the world has ever seen? Of course it's extreme. And I think it proves that, it doesn't. We Americans would like to think that our free expression and allowing all kinds of opinion and all kinds of criticism of the government is totally essential part of the economy. And what the Chinese have proved is you can have a screamingly successful economy with a fairly controlling government. All the government has to do is create a lot of Smithian capitalism. And if you do that, having a sort of a controlling one-party government doesn't matter. That's not a fashionable thing to say, but I think it's true.
Certainly not a fashionable thing to say by Mr. Munger, stating that basically all that is needed to be able to have a screamingly successful economy is to sprinkle in a little bit of Smithian capitalism. For those of you not familiar with what he's meaning there, he's referring to Adam Smith and The Wealth of Nations, the concept of capitalism and the division of labor, and of course, moving according to self-interest. Well, it turns out that moving according to self-interest, regardless perhaps of a democratic government, whether you have a democratic government or a communist government, it appears that moving according to your own self-interest will make you rich, right? Who would have thunk that you could have actually used this system in a communist type of government or a communist regime? This is the point that Mr. Munger is making, and it's extremely important. It's important because, again, here in the United States, we often confuse or conflate the need to have a democratic process in order to have the successful economy that we have. And what Mr. Munger is pointing out, and many people still don't understand, and they need to hear this, is the fact that if you have a communist government, you can still eat the fruit of the wealth of nations. That is, you can still, and in fact, not just eat the fruit of the wealth of nations, you can eat more fruit of the wealth of nations. You can really eat the fruit of the wealth of nations, even with a communist government, right? Let's go on and say, why is China being so successful? Why has it been so successful here, especially in 2020? Well, one of the things we can look at certainly is the fact that China has taken a very pro-science and pro-technology approach. In fact, there was just a report revealed, or I should say there was a report released that in a report released earlier in the week, it was learned that Beijing had unveiled a plan to spend $1.6 trillion through 2025 over the next 5 years to develop next-generation infrastructure in 7 key areas: 5G, artificial intelligence, electrical vehicle charging, data centers, high-speed urban railways, ultra-high voltage transmission systems, and industrial-scale internet. And let's throw in one more pro-science approach that China adopted in 2020. It did not trivialize the global health crisis for political gain. In fact, here in the United States, we had mixed messaging from the government about how to proceed against this global health crisis. Half of the country was told that it didn't matter. The other half was told that they were all going to die. But in China, of course, they had a rapid approach. They were able to curb the insidious disease in their borders by draconian measures. Many people want to say, well, how do they do that? They can't do that. And at the same time, they say China has an iron hand. It's communist. It's terrible. Well, that's why they were able to shut it down, right? There weren't people who said, you're taking away my rights by making me wear a mask. In other words, there is pro-science and pro-technology emerging here in China, and a desire to trivialize the pandemic for political gain made no sense in China. So therefore, they simply confronted it head on. There were many other nations like China that confronted the pandemic head on and did not turn it into a political football. And those countries are also faring much better than the United States, which leads the world in coronavirus cases and in deaths. But let's take a step back here for a moment and realize that it's not just that China is winning because it's doing right things, like it's moving according to science and technology. It's doing the right things to grow the economy. It's not relying upon a lot of debt, although China does have debt. If you take a look at the 2020 policy response between the United States and China, you'll find that China right now has an interest rate of around 3.85%. Compare that to America's 0.25%, practically 0%. So China's interest rate at nearly 4% is not artificially lowered to 0% to infantilize the investor class, unlike here in the United States. And with a nearly 4% interest rate, China has plenty of room to cut that rate if needed. But in the United States, not so much. So China is much better positioned over the next decade, in our opinion. And here in the United States, we have had 13 years of near zero interest rates. We believe that's going to end very badly. The U.S. economy is still so fragile after the March decimation of the stock market and of the economy. It's still so fragile that it requires 0% interest rates just to deliver sub 2% GDP growth rates. Let me repeat this. The United States economy is still so fragile that it requires 0% interest rates to deliver sub 2% GDP growth rates, right? If interest rates in the United States were raised to where they are in China today, around 4%, the house of cards here in America would come crashing down. In fact, I've often talked about this particular stat, that if you go back and you look at interest rates, the average interest rate here in the United States since 1971, you'll discover that average interest rate is 5.67%. And right now, of course, the United States interest rate, the federal funds rate, is around 0%, and it's in that target range. But if those interest rates were raised to the average interest rate that we have had over the last, 50 years, then what would happen to the economy? The economy would utterly collapse, right? This economy cannot handle a 5.67% interest rate, and it can't handle a 3.85% interest rate like we have, or like they have in China. So it's not only that China is winning, it's not only that China is moving ahead and growing despite what has happened because they have maneuvered this situation better, but it's also the fact that America is losing. And because America is losing, it's also amplifying China's gains. Now, many people feel like we need to attack China because they are doing the right things for their own economy. Many people feel that we need to lambaste China because they are moving according to their own self-interest and are using capitalism to their own advantage. And this would be exactly or akin to what happened back in the 20th century, the early part of the 20th century, as Great Britain was falling. It was losing its crown, economically speaking, to this upstart United States of America that was emerging. Well, of course, in Great Britain, there was a tremendous amount of complaint about how there were unfair trade practices in the United States. There were unfair labor practices being, in the United States. And they were blaming the United States, Great Britain was, for their economic downfall. In essence, Great Britain, toward the end of its empire, kind of succumbed to a national victimhood that labeled the United States as this pernicious actor that was using unfair trade and labor practices to decapitate the glorious British Empire. This happens virtually in every type of situation where you have an emergent power and a bloated existing power that is on the decline. This has been written about, by the way, by Graham Allison, a really interesting scholar who has written a book called The Thucydides Trap. It's certainly worth a read, but it talks about this exact situation to where you have an ascendant power like China and you have an existing bloated, debt-filled power that is on the decline, and this often leads to war, at least historically speaking. Not always, but many times it leads to war. That's one thing we should keep in mind about all of this, is that there could be, at some point, a war to exact vengeance on China, per se, from the United States vantage point, or vice versa. And so we see many Americans being, prodded to blame China for seeking their own self-interest, just as we saw in the fall of Great Britain blaming Americans, right? In both individual cases, they had the wrong prescription. It wasn't to go after America or bomb America. That was not really what Great Britain would do or should do. But instead, it mattered that there should be some sort of competition here. And when it comes to the United States and our view of China, sadly, I really think we have the wrong prescription. I think that by blaming China for their movement towards self-interest, their desire to grow, the same desire, by the way, that exists in America to grow, I think to attack that is perhaps to attack the wrong thing. Here in the United States, and let me build the case here, is that here in the United States, one of the strange things that really confuses me, at least, as I look out as an economist at the global economy and also at the U.S. economy, is the fact that there is such little blame on the part of the American people upon the greed of capitalism. Really. I mean, quite frankly, the greed of the capitalists, the greed of Wall Street, the greed of the U.S. economy, the greed that motivates capitalism. In fact, that is not something that's actually blamed. I can't tell you how many times I have heard that we need to vote the people in office out because of China or because of this or that. And in reality, friends, you cannot vote out a politician and expect any kind of change. Why is that? Why can you not vote out a politician and really expect any kind of change in the trajectory of China or the trajectory of the United States? Well, the reason is because corporations own the government. They own the government. Corporations own the media, right? And we have been railing against the corporations on this broadcast for years. I mean, I have said some very interesting things about corporations that have caught people's ears, and I've gotten many letters about them. But I'm telling you, the corporations control the government. They control the government, right? And corporations control the media. And that's a very bad combination. If they control one, that's one thing. If they control the other, that's another thing. But if they control them both, oh, you're in a bad, bad place. You know, right now, if you take a look at the total federal revenue for the United States in 2020, their total federal revenue was $3.5 trillion. That sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it? It is a lot of money. But when you take a look at that number, $3.5 trillion, you may not know that that is equal to the top 15 or 20 U.S. corporations. That total, that $3.5 trillion, that's about what the top 15 to 20 U.S. corporations earn each year. So if your top 20 corporations, just the top 20 out of the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of them, if just the top 20 earn the same amount of money that the United States government makes in 1 year, then you're dealing with an awesome, mighty power here. So now who controls the government? I said corporations control the government. How is that? Well, corporations control the government because, in many ways, due to some of the poor laws we have here. Certainly, we have seen Citizens United, which remove limits on donations to political candidates. We have seen all kinds of tax breaks for corporations where they don't have to pay taxes. We have seen all kinds of benefits given to corporations to employ people in China for their factories. This is what I'm trying to say to the listener today. And what I really think will help you as you look at this situation is the fact that how can you blame Chinese workers for working at a factory that is owned by a U.S. company in China? How is the Chinese man to blame for working at a factory, a U.S. factory in China? Well, how in the world did the U.S. factory get in China? Is that China's fault? Is it China's fault that the United States built a factory in China and that it employs Chinese people? Is that China's fault? It sounds like it's been permitted by who? By the government. Who's owned by who? By the corporations who want to do business everywhere and they want to have lower labor costs, right? So how can we blame for accepting a job with a U.S. corporation based in China, right? It's not his fault. It's the corporation's fault for moving their corporation there and not employing people here in the United States. Some people like to think that this is also a big cabal, that there is a group of people who are trying to destroy the United States through a very specific plan. Well, without any kind of immediate evidence of who these people are or of what their plan is, we can say this, that humans have a tendency to screw things up even without that cabal, okay? So remember, whenever U.S. corporations were moving and offshoring jobs to China, many of these companies only got to do that because what? Because they were lobbying the government to allow them to do that, right? So in other words, the corporations get what they want from the government. Do you get what you want from the government? Are you getting what you want? Well, guess what? You don't have enough money to give, do you? You don't have enough money to give to get them to give you what you want. But if you're Walmart and you make $524 billion in a single year in revenues, guess what? You're going to be able to move those lawmakers. I think one way, if you really want to solve the crisis here in America, one of the simplest ways to solve it, and I heard someone say this years ago, and I think it's probably been around forever. It's not an original idea, but I think it's wonderful, is that a politician should have to wear the logos of all of the corporations that donate to him, right? He should have to wear their logo on his suit. You say, well, that's crazy. No, it's not crazy. It's not crazy at all. If a corporation donates to a particular candidate or to a particular politician, he should let the American people know that broadly, and he should wear it on his shirt. Be proud. Be proud that Google gives you money. Be proud that Walmart gives you money. Show it off. Be proud that Amazon gives you money. Let us know where you stand, Mr. Politician. Let us see. Let us see exactly who's giving you money. And you know what? When you look at this and you realize that these politicians, you can't kick them out and expect a different result, because the next ones who come in will be bought by the corporations. Now, the corporations have an incentive. It's called a profit motive, right? So they have to work to create shareholder value. If they put something ahead of shareholder value, creating shareholder value, they have done something wrong. If they want to make a moral play, if they say, we think this is immoral and we're not going to do this, but it's going to cost the shareholders money, then they can get sued for that. Many people don't understand this, that corporations have to move according to profit maximization. And nobody thinks that's a problem. Everybody thinks that's great, because earning profit is exactly what everybody should do, and there's nothing wrong with it. But in fact, it's wrong for the Chinese, isn't it? Many people say, well, we think that it's completely fine that people should move according to self-interest unless they're Chinese, right? Well, that's not a right way to approach it. That's not a sustainable way to look at it. That's not even a logical way to look at it. So everyone moves according to their own self-interest. And we live in a society that is driven by greed. But you don't hear the greed of the corporations brought out in many of these arguments. What we hear is that the politician is the one who needs to be removed. But what about the profit motive of the corporations? And what about the fact that they are giving these politicians lots of money and they are getting what they want at the cost of you and your job, right? So because we're blinded by the goodness of greed, because we're blinded by the goodness of capitalism, and that capitalism in no way could ever be wrong, and that moving according to our self-interest and moving according to our greed and maximizing shareholder value is the ultimate gospel in this country, then you can't question it. And so therefore it must be the politicians who are letting us down, right? It's not the greedy capitalists. It can't be that, right? Because that would be anathema to what we believe about capitalism and greed. So we have deified greed, and we have largely given a get-out-of-jail-free card to corporations because we assume that they're doing what's right, and we don't hold them accountable. We hold the politicians accountable who are bought by the corporations, and it's like a whack-a-mole. You throw one out, and the next one pops up, and he's bought by another corporation, right? So, in other words, you can't get rid of it. You have to get corporate money out of Washington. That's what you have to do. It's not China's fault that Microsoft or Amazon or Walmart wants to do business in China and wants to hire Chinese workers and at the expense of your job. That's not China's fault. You have to point at the corporation who is doing it and the government who is permitting it. And why is the government permitting it? Because they have received money, right? This is why we call our show Follow the Money. It always results in a dollar bill at the end, right? That's always what it's about. Many people think there's some sort of great ideological force that we're up against. And that they're right. We are up against a great evil ideological force, and that is called greed. Everyone is moving according to their greed. And when you have a system that deifies greed, and you have a system that says greed is good, and you have a system that says make as much money as you possibly can, and that should be the very top of the rung, and you can give money to politicians and they can give you what you want and everything's fine, you're never going to have the outcome you desire in that situation. You're never going to have it. You're always going to have corporations moving according to their own self-interest, and that doesn't include your self-interest, right? So as long as you're not running Amazon.com or running Walmart, then guess what? You're not going to get what you want from the government. Do you understand how it works? Now, so many people fall for conspiracy theories around this topic because they don't want to point the finger at greed, because they have to defend greed, because that they think that greed is what makes America good. But in reality, it's what they're complaining about. It's the greed of the corporation offshoring their jobs that they're complaining about, but they blame China, but China's not the one who did it. It's the corporation who offshored your job. It's the U.S. corporation who did. They're the ones who did it. And on top of that, you also have the politician who okayed it or green-lighted it. Why? Because he received money from the corporation to green-light it, right? So you can't just cut off You can't just throw out politicians and solve the problem. The politicians are just the ones who are greenlighting it when they get money in their pocket from the greedy corporations, right? Everybody's greedy. Everybody's moving according to their own greed. And China is moving according to its own greed. And according to the American gospel, that's good. China should be pat on the back. But instead, we here in America, we think it's fine to go according to our own greed, but China cannot move according to its own greed. That would be wrong and immoral. So we have a very confusing situation today. And not only do the corporations own the government, which is clear. Look at corporate socialism. There's a tremendous amount of incentives given to corporations. You've got state and local subsidies to corporations. They get $80 billion in subsidies every single year. You've got direct federal subsidies to corporations equaling almost $100 billion every year. You got federal tax breaks for corporations, which President Trump and his gang pushed through a big tax break for the corporations who are offshoring jobs. And they just get a big, nice, fat tax break, right? Amazon.com paying very little in taxes. Walmart, the same thing. You're directly subsidizing companies like Walmart with your tax dollars, right? And nobody gets outraged. They get very outraged if a poor person receives a check. But if Walmart or Amazon gets federal subsidies, it's fine. It's quiet. You know why? Do you know why that's the case? Because those same corporations that get the money, they also own the media. They own the media. They control the media. And so therefore, when you look at corporate control, you'll discover that corporations are out to protect themselves, not you. They're out to protect themselves, not you. There's federal tax breaks for wealthy hedge fund managers, right? There's subsidies for the fast food industry, hundreds of billions of dollars that are paid each year in indirect subsidies to the fast food industry. Mortgage deductions, 80% of which benefit the homeowners with incomes over $100,000 per year, right? Not to mention all of the meaningless kinds of legal oversight of corporations where they get to engage in criminal and wrongful activities and yet never really have to pay a fine. And if they do, it's pretty minimal, right? So many of the things that corporations do on a regular basis, we would be thrown in jail for, right? But not corporations. They can't do that, right? Let's not even count all the Wall Street bailouts that we've seen over the last decade, where just tremendous amounts, trillions of your dollars have been poured into big banks and into big corporations, tax-paying dollars that you're going to have to pay back. Nobody cares, right? Nobody really worries about that. They blame China. They blame China as if China is the one that is causing the government to actually do all of these things. It's the corporations here in America, friends. It's the corporations. And they own the media. I can't tell you how many times. There's very few original thinkers in the country today. I'm convinced. Because what I hear mostly are people regurgitating corporate media. There's very few original thinkers today. When I go throughout the week, and I'm not telling you that I'm some sort of perfect angel, but what I'm saying to you is that I don't ingest the op-eds of the corporate media. I don't think media should be for profit. I just don't. So I don't consume a lot of it. Now, I do read the Wall Street Journal. I do read Barron's. I do read some market journals to find out what's happening in the overall economy. But when it comes to how I should feel about a politician or how I should feel about a particular system or what I should feel about this or that, I'm not tuning into Fox News to find that out. I'm not tuning into CNN to have them tell me what I should think. These are for-profit companies. Their number one goal is profit maximization. They are not there to educate you. They're there to take your money. They're there to promote the corporation's agenda. Whoever gives them money, they're the ones who get their truth peddled. And so I'm not interested in hearing what other people think about all of this, especially when it's coming from the corporate media. The corporate media, there should not be a corporate profit motive in sharing the news. That just doesn't even make sense. News is just news. If you want to report news, that's fine. But why would you want to make a buck off it? Because as soon as you want to make a buck off of sharing news, now suddenly there's an angle. Now suddenly there's an incentive. Now suddenly there's an agenda. So the U.S. seems blind to the fact that its own system, that its own promotion of greed and its own promotion of corporate power has been the source of so many of its problems. It's greed, and the promotion of self-interest by corporations who don't really have a moral compass are the predominant reason why many of us feel that America is being carved up. You know, America, very similar to the Roman Empire that preceded it, this American empire is over-leveraged. It's overextended. It's full of hubris. We are bloated through rampant overconsumption. We have everything we could desire. We have more wealth, more so-called rights, including the right to pursue our own life, liberty, and happiness. And yet, globally speaking, the U.S. enjoys little happiness relative to its massive pile of consumer gadgets and enormous wealth that it's heaped up for itself today. The U.S. increasingly appears lower and lower on the global list of countries ranked by so-called happiness. And today, Washington boasts a $27 trillion national debt. That's anything but responsible. That's anything but just. That's anything but moral. In fact, you can really build a simple case that the debt loads that America and Americans have taken on themselves has not only delivered them into an unending cycle of debt slavery, but so too, through their careless and reckless overconsumption, they have laid the lock and chains upon their own children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. You just think about that $27 trillion national debt. If you go back to 2015, you'll remember that candidate Donald Trump vowed to pay off the national debt if elected president. And when you look at the facts, you look at the reality, the national debt rose $8 trillion during President Trump's one and only term in office. That's the largest increase ever. The growth in the annual deficit under Trump ranks as the third biggest increase relative to the size of the economy of any U.S. presidential administration. So our national debt grew $8 trillion over the last 4 years. And we heard really nothing from the Tea Party, did we? We really didn't hear any fiscal conservatives coming out of the woodwork and saying, we're concerned about the national debt. You didn't hear a peep, did you? You didn't hear a peep. And $8 trillion was that. I remember storming across stages back in 2007, talking about America's $8 trillion national debt. I remember that. Mr. Trump, in 4 years, added the same amount of debt to the economy in 4 years that was accumulated from George Washington until 2007. Okay, so much for greatest economy ever, so much for great fiscal conservative kind of thinking, so much for whatever that is. That is not a right way to approach the economy, right? And so when you get those kinds of results from your politicians, you think, well, I'll just throw them out. But you can't throw them out because it's like a whack-a-mole, as I stated. You're going to get another one right behind him who's going to do the same thing, the same exact thing. So I think I'll close out. I got an email, by the way, from Ned in Houston, Texas. He's one of our members here at Follow the Money, and he asked me this question, and I thought many people might be interested, but he asked me, Jerry, do you think we are sliding into communism here in the United States? Do I think that we are sliding into communism here in the United States? And based upon everything that I've said up to this point, let me give you my answer. Inasmuch as the corporations will benefit from America's slide into communism, then my answer would be yes. In other words, what I'm saying to you is that remember what Mr. Munger said earlier in this podcast on the clip that we played. He said that a bunch of communist Chinese took the capitalism of Adam Smith and they turned it into an incredible situation that the world has never seen, right? But they did it within a communist system, right? And so remember, if your goal is profit maximization, then why would American corporations not want more of a communistic nation if it means that they will have profit maximization? So therefore, if it makes more money to have a communistic system, if the corporations can make another dollar, if they have a communistic system, well, then maybe the corporations will begin to promote communism in Washington to the extent that it makes them more money. This is what I want you to see, that it's not some sort of ideological situation where men are saying, we want to turn this thing into communism because of just because we want to. No, people don't think like that. You don't think like that. I don't think like that. Nobody thinks like that. Everybody moves according to their own self-interest. If they can make more money with a communistic government, then they will begin to promote that and begin to push that upon to the representatives in Washington. Now, I don't think that we're heading towards a communist system anytime soon, but I do think that the business schools are going to be noticing the incredible rise of China and its unique case study of how it used a communistic system and coupled it with capitalism and had a better outcome than the United States did. I think that they will certainly look at that, and I think that will cause many corporations and corporate leaders to say, well, maybe we should have more of a communist system, right? Because you make more money. But that's not the same as saying there's some group of people who are trying to make us communist. That would be people saying, we make more money by becoming communist, so let's become communist, right? Let's begin to move in that direction. That's fine. That might happen. We can see corporate leaders doing that. But in as much as they think they will make money, they will move it into a communist system. So if you want to avoid communism, my friend, if you're out there saying we really shouldn't have communism, we don't need communism in America, you know what you have to do? You have to slow the greed, because greed will lead these corporations to want a communist system because that's what works so well for China. So I hope all of this makes sense. And I hope you have enjoyed my diatribe here on the topic of China and capitalism and communism. But no, I don't think that we are in the grips of communism per se, although I think we could be sliding towards it in as much as it makes money for corporations. If you are against that, then you should be against the rampant greed in our culture. You should be against politicians taking corporate cash. These are the things that you can do. What you certainly can't do is rail against China for pursuing its own self-interest. Right? You can't point the finger at China and say they're the problem. They're not the ones who gave themselves jobs at U.S. corporations. They're not the ones who built the factory for the well, maybe they built it, but they're not the ones who brought the U.S. factory to China, right? They're not the ones. They're the ones who are benefiting from our greed and our desire for lower pay. So we give them the jobs. We have to see this properly, or we're going to continue to be deluded by interests on both the right and the left, which are both controlled by corporations. I don't listen to the left or the right. They don't have anything to say to me. I don't listen to the political right. I don't listen to the political left. They're both bought and paid for. They're certainly not going to fix our problem. If they were going to fix our problem, they would have fixed it a long time ago. They're not going to. They are a part of the problem. The right and the left are a part of the problem. So turn off Fox News, turn off MSNBC, turn off the noise, and start focusing less upon the White House and more upon your house. Hey friends, Jerry Robinson here with Follow the Money Radio. Many of you know that I have been position trading and swing trading and even day trading the markets for nearly 25 years. And just recently, I completed a brand new swing trading course for those who are interested in learning how to create short-term profits by swing trading stocks, ETFs, or even cryptocurrencies. In this insightful and powerful 75-minute new video course, you will learn directly from me on many topics, including chart reading skills for swing traders, 4 moving averages that all swing traders should know, the best indicators for swing traders, stop-loss strategies for swing traders, and I even share many powerful swing trading entry and exit strategies with you, along with 5 swing trading pitfalls that you want to avoid. This is a power-packed video course for the new or experienced swing trader. And you can get access to this brand new swing trading video course in 2 different ways. One is simply to go to our website, followthemoney.com/shop, and buy it through our online store. It's on special right now at a drastically reduced price. The second option that you have is to become a member here at Follow the Money. Become a silver, gold, or platinum member, and you'll unlock instant access to this brand new swing trading course, along with a myriad of other trading and investing educational resources. If you're tired of watching stocks and cryptocurrencies and ETFs rise in price, but not actually participating in some of those gains, I encourage you to check out this brand new swing trading course, as it provides an excellent introduction to profitable short-term trading. Invest in yourself today. Go to followthemoney.com/shop and buy our brand new swing trading course, now on sale, or become a member here at Follow the Money and unlock instant access to this course along with many other educational resources. Hey friends, this is Jerry Robinson from Follow the Money Weekly. Recently, we have been receiving many emails from our listeners commenting on the great help they're getting from our precious metals expert, Tom Cloud. Gold and silver are excellent hedges against the growing threat of coming U.S. inflation. Who's your gold guy? Make it Tom Cloud. With over 30 years experience with precious metals, Tom will answer all of your questions. Don't buy your gold and silver through some call center and pay inflated prices. Call my good friend Tom Cloud and speak directly with him and get all of your questions answered. For a limited time, Tom is offering free shipping and insurance on every gold and silver purchase made by our listeners. Call 800-247-2812. And when you do, tell him that Jerry Robinson from Follow the Money Weekly sent you, and he'll throw in that free shipping and insurance on your entire order. Call your gold guy, Tom Cloud, right now for the very best deals on gold and silver coins. 800-247-2812. That is 800-247-2812. All right, friends, welcome back to the program. Our final moments here on Follow the Money Radio. I sure hope you enjoyed today's podcast. If you like what we were talking about, we have talked a lot about this topic. In fact, many ways to invest in China and in many other countries for that matter. Go to followthemoney.com. You can find many of the different resources we provided. We have a huge amount of free resources, lots of YouTube videos we've done over the years. I'm thinking of one right now that talks about how to invest in China through ETFs. So there's a lot there that you can learn more about what's going on, and followthemoney.com is where to find it. As always, I'd like to leave you with a final word, and this time taken from the book of Luke, chapter 12, verse 15, where it says that Jesus says, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consists not in the abundance of the things which he possesses." Covetousness and greed, Jesus warns us against, and that's just something to think about. Remember, friends, when you want the truth about the global economy, just follow the money. Have a safe and prosperous week, and we'll see you right back here next time. Until then, God bless.
All of the information contained on the Follow the Money podcast is strictly for informational and educational purposes. It should not be construed as specific investment advice. The views and opinions of our guests and sponsors, including Tom Cloud, are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of FTMDaily.com or Robinson Media Group, LLC. Jerry Robinson does hold an insurance license and at times may offer consulting on life insurance and fixed retirement income products. Follow-up, individualized responses to email or phone requests that involve the rendering of personalized investment advice for compensation will not be made absent compliance with state investment advisor registration requirements or an applicable exemption or exclusion and applicable insurance regulations. Past performance is not indicative of future results. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on the podcast. Remember, never do your financial planning through podcast or radio. It's your money. Be wise. Do your due diligence and always consult a trusted financial professional before making any financial decisions.